Hello and welcome to Fearless DIY Music. My name is Tristam Lass, and today I'm joined by my dear friend Kevin Gamble. He and I are going to have a conversation about a topic, but to start things off, I was going to see if Kevin has any insights or questions about current content on the channel. So Kevin, good morning, and do you have anything for me today?
Good morning, Tris. Glad to be here as always. A lot of good topics you've been covering lately, but one video really jumped out to me. I think it's worth checking out for anyone who hasn't seen it already, is your video about odd time signatures. I thought there were some good insights and some good demonstrations in there that people should check out and apply to their own work. But a couple things were takeaways from that for me. One is it reminded me of my favorite odd time signature story that I've heard, and it has to do with Jethro Tull and a song that they recorded back in the late 70s called Out Solstice Bells. It's kind of become a low-key holiday traditions. You can even hear it on American radio around the holiday season. But most of the song, outside of the choruses, is in 7/8. It's got a really sort of lively, jumping, quirky feel to the rhythm. It really impacts the song. And apparently, what happened when that song was recorded was when the record label execs heard it, they didn't like it. They thought the odd time signature was not commercial. They didn't think the public would go for it. So they asked the band to re-record it in common time, 4/4 time, to make it more digestible. The band didn't want to do it, but they went ahead with the record company's wishes and re-recorded the entire song in common time in 4/4. And this was a few years ago, was released to the world for the first time on a reissue of the album Songs from the Wood. And it's amazing to hear how much difference a conventional time signature made in a bad way. The song sounds just kind of plodding and flat. It doesn't have the energy or the momentum that the 7/8 time gave it. So it's really striking to hear the difference that in the same song that a slight tweak of the time signature can make. And as the story goes, the record company agreed. They heard the re-recorded version and said, you're right. This isn't as good. So go with the original. And it's become a well-known song since then. So a great example of how a little tweak can change the entire feel of a song for the better or worse. But the main takeaway from that video for me was just how choices that we make early in the creative process can have implications throughout the rest of the creative process. If you start with your idea, your creative inspiration, and what you create outside of the recording process, and then build the process around that idea, it has an entire, set of implications that make the result more original, more authentic, and more about you. Whereas with digital recording, we're usually presented with, when we open the DAW, we're presented with a 4/4 grid, probably 120 beats a minute, all throughout the song. And it's very easy to get into a pattern of just plugging things into that structure and just kind of going with what we're given as a default. And we've seen that kind of snowball into things like people using sample libraries of prefab beats and prefab rhythm parts and so forth. And it gets to the point where you're really just sort of plugging in pieces that are already made. And once one part sounds conventional, it kind of pulls all the other parts toward it to sound conventional. If you've got a prefab boom chick drum part, what sounds better with that than like an eighth note bass part? What sounds better with that than a conventional sounding guitar part? But
Sure.
the examples that you showed in that video really highlight how we don't have to be defined by that. If you start with an idea and build the grid around your idea, you can still have all the advantages of the grid, structure and organization for your project. without having it fall into something conventional and unoriginal. And so grids can handle different time signatures. They can handle tempo changes. A lot of DAWs will even build the time grid and the tempo grid around a pre-recorded part. You can map the tempo to something you've just played out of time, so to speak. And so it's a really good reminder of how some of those small decisions we hardly even think about at the very start can completely change the identity of what happens going forward. And you have a lot of examples in your own body of work of the idea defining the rest of the process. And I think that type of mentality, sort of having that intentional approach to the start of a recording process, is really has implications for what we're going to talk about here today.
Yeah, I think it's critical. I've done, like I said in the video, I was very clear about, I made the video because I've been, preparing to record, and I've written a bunch of songs. And as I'm programming my, as I'm doing my drum sequencing, my sophisticated click tracks, as I like to call them, I discover, time and time again when I'm sitting down with it, I'm like, oh, that's not in 4/4. Oh, that bit isn't in 4/4. Or, oh, this section is definitely going to be a different tempo. And as I program, I, build all that in. So when I dump my 2-track stereo of the digital, from my drum workstation into my DAW, it's all already there. I've got I've got a map to follow that has all the tempo changes. So I'm actually treating it as if it's like a drummer, that I've recorded the drummer, and now all the cool funky stuff is already built in there. And I think that a lot of times people might have the feeling that it's like, oh geez, this isn't right, or oh geez, other people may not get this or know how to play along with it, so maybe I should square it off. And it's like, no, don't do that. Just stretch it. You can, and like you just said, the technology's there. I'm always playing with, I use hydrogen, as my drum sequencer, and I'm always playing with it to push its limitations. I have it on the 64th note setting so that I can have a snare hit just be a little bit off, because that's where I feel it, in whatever I've written, and it's not off. It's just, it's not in 4/4 at that point, not going to be in that 16th note grid anymore, going way off of that into nuance territory. And I think that's where all the fun of it is. And I know certainly when I do acoustic drums, I'm beginning to lean towards the idea that there may be more acoustic drums on my upcoming project than I think, because I'm just kind of feeling that way. And to have my digital drums already have all the flavors in there will make it a lot easier for me to land these kind of quirkier fills that I'm thinking about putting in on the acoustic kit. So yeah, and I really appreciate you bringing that up, that the intentionality of the original idea, if your original idea is good and you feel that it's good, you should run with that and not try to, oh, it's going to be a lot more complicated to, have my DAW to work with this or whatever. And actually it's a lot easier just to manipulate the DAW than to ruin a musical idea, I think. So anyway, I think that it's pretty cool that you decided to mention all of that, and I really appreciate you enjoying the video, and I hope more people watch it. It's kind of criminally underwatched at this point. We'll put a link to it down below. Which leads, like Kevin was saying, leads to our topic today. I am in the midst of preparing to record, and so I am doing my ritualistic things that I do to prepare for recording. There are the obvious things that you have to have if you're planning on doing like a full-length project like I'm doing. You have to have the songs written, you have to have an idea of how you want them to sound, and things like that. And right now I'm in the phase of like picking out guitars, like I'm starting to line up, okay, this is the top shelf, this is the bottom shelf, if this one works, that's great. If this one doesn't, I go to that one if I need a humbucker sound. So I'm beginning to gather, kind of, we talked about this a few episodes ago about like, your sonic palette. It was in the studio tour, it's like talking about, oh, what pedals do I need to have under my feet, and getting all my tones together, and what songs will have acoustic guitar, and what kind of bass tone am I going to go for? Am I going to keep a bass tone for the whole project, or am I going to do a bass tone dependent upon the song? So these are a lot of the questions that I think we all ask ourselves as we get ready to record, and it can be daunting. And so what I've been doing is just kind of doing bite-sized pieces where I'm like, okay, I know that I want to have this happen, so I line up one portion of the process. I mean, the first thing that I'm going to be starting with probably this coming week will be taking all of those hydrogen drum programs and starting to mix them. Because, hydrogen gives you the ability to add effects to individual tracks and to go ahead and get a really solid stereo mix of your drums so you can export that as a wave file into the DAW, which is great because then I can just kind of override everything else and just go, boom, there it is, and I'm playing along with that and not anything else. So I was just wondering, I know that you're much further along in your own recording journey right now on some things that you're working on. And I was curious, about what your process is. I'd like to hear some about how you prepare to record. Maybe I'll bounce back with some more commentary on that, and then, just see if anybody's interested in leaving comments of their own about how they go about it. So I'd love to hear from you, Kevin.
That sounds that sounds great, Tris. And I think what you just talked about and what I am doing are examples of, from all the way back when you've talked about the setup of your studio and how you put things together. It's about kind of starting with where you are, what you're working with, and then, how best to arrange those variables to accomplish what you want. In your case, you've got kind of dedicated recording spaces with live amps and so forth set up. And, in my situation, I've got, instruments and recording capability, but the space is very limited. And so I'm repurposing the same recording space for recording different things at different times. I've got various acoustic instruments, strings, and even potentially winds, and there's vocals. And so for me, it was a process of mapping things out at the top and figuring out what the instruments I need are going to be, and kind of organizing them and arranging them into clusters to record. So much like you,
so
I
basically,
kind of started.
Sorry, I am going to interrupt you. So what you're saying is that due to your limitations, you have to have a fully realized roadmap of your arrangement. You have to have the song fully arranged, if not literally on paper scored. You have to have that completely planned out. Otherwise, it'll be chaos. Am I right in that assessment?
Chaos, or at least much more inefficient than I want it to be. This current song I've been working on, which is close to the end of its process, it's been very drawn out. I've been using it as not just the recording of a song, but putting together a way of doing things for recording. And that starts all the way at the beginning, like you said, with the arrangement. I wrote the song entirely in my head, to the point where I was envisioning and playing all the parts in my head before I started recording. And then the next step after that was mapping out the arrangement. I experimented with ways of doing that. I actually sat down and put together a spreadsheet where I counted the measures for each section of the song, named each section of the song, and mapped them out. And I don't know if I would need to do a spreadsheet every time, but what that did was allow me to figure out what instruments were going to be needed, and then to transfer that into the DAW. My DAW has an arranger track where you can effectively kind of put little file tabs at the top along the time metric that say, this is the intro, this is the verse, this is the chorus, this is the solo, things like that. And so once you map out that structure, then it simplifies plugging things into it. It simplifies navigating the song as you're recording and mixing. It really allows the power of the grid to work for you instead of containing your idea. It's building a structure around the idea, which gives you a great sort of skeleton, a scaffold to work within. And so in my case, I planned out the arrangement. I decided the tempo up front. I sort of, used a tempo counter to track what tempo I was playing things in naturally. And so I had that structure built in. And then it was a case of, okay, how am I going to efficiently use this recording space? So with the drums in place, the next thing to do was set up the mics for the acoustic instruments. So I've got acoustic guitar back here, mandolin, Irish bouzouki. I could record them all in several takes of each one with the recording set up one way, and
So were
then
you
broke that
just
down.
real quick for clarity? So were you using the same mic setup and preamp setup and all that stuff for each instrument? So you basically you had a dedicated setup and then you captured all of them with the same setup.
For those instruments, I was able to do that. And so part of that planning process is figuring out where that's possible. So knocked all those instruments out at once and then repurposed the recording space for a vocal recording, repurposed the recording space for recording a saxophone. My son's going to play a saxophone part on the song. And so, just planning and organizing that allowed that to be done efficiently. So it wasn't constantly setting up and breaking down and having different mic placements for each take of the recording. So that allows for some consistency. And so starting with that arrangement, like you said, starting with that structure, that allows you to plan everything else out and figure out the way it's going to work best for you. And it really is a personal process about how we work best and what we're trying to accomplish. And so the more you can map that out ahead of time, the less chaos, as you say, will ensue.
Cool. Now, I do have a question, because this may be very applicable to some of the people who may be watching this. Due to your limited space and sound constraints, how are you doing your electric bass and electric guitar?
Well, we've talked a little bit about that on previous videos in terms of the options that are available. For me, I'm doing my electric guitar tracks through the Strymon Iridium pedal. For me, that's an amp in a box. It's not all the effects. It's not all the processing. It's not any of that. It's just a straight amp tone. So the result I get is very much like recording an amp. It's just the sound of a guitar in the amp. And then with bass, it'll be a little bit of trial and error to see what's going to sit best in the finished mix, but that's mostly direct. I'm going to use a track through the Iridium as well, and may even, depending on how everything sounds when things are sitting in the final mix, I may even do a live recording of an amp to just blend that in a little bit. But the bass in this track is not really revealed that much. It's not a standout instrument, so it doesn't require texture as much as it requires a fundamental underneath all these layers and layers of acoustic and guitar parts and so forth. So the needs of the project, the needs of the song creatively determine that. I've got another song I'm looking at doing later on where the bass will have much more prominence in the mix, and so that will probably be more of an experiment for how to record that. But for this, the purpose defines the approach I'm taking.
Are you still using that little GK?
I still have that. Yes, I still have a little old GK amp. That's really good for clean sounds and has a really great chorus effect on it. If I want a little bit more of an edge or a kind of an amp sound that's more distinct from a direct sound, it's my old Peavey combo, the very old one from the late 80s.
The original.
Still have it, and when you crank that a little bit, it has a really great natural grunt to it. And so that's just knowing the palette you've got and that kind of being the options that for your creative choices. And it's a fairly short list. It's like, those are my bass amps. And so that helps me, stay on task as far as not getting lost in option paralysis. If I want a little more of this, it's this. If I want a little more of this, it's the other thing, and then getting on with it.
Very cool. All right. Well, I know I interjected. I kind of answered all my own. I answered all, or asked all the questions that I wanted to ask, and then So I was just gonna say that I am at the point now where I'm ready to start getting the drum tracks mixed from Hydrogen, and the thing that's starting to now here's where like my all the best laid preparation. I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna use digital drums for this first first project that I have all composed and ready to go, because it'll make everything so fast. But now I'm beginning to feel the push-pull of the songs a little bit more, and I'm like, geez, maybe I will just use that as a sophisticated click track and track drums. So I did bust out some extra mic stands, and I kind of have it ready to go. I'm like, I could mic the kit and practice a little bit, maybe see if I can get some takes. And I'm just like, just do the toms.
A lot of work.
Yeah, just do the toms.
So you're approaching, I mean, I'm talking about
tough,
a song project for me. You're approaching an album project, and you envision this as an album. You've written the songs, you've got this concept mapped out. So are you doing this like an album's worth of drum tracks at a time and then an album's worth of the next layer? Or is your approach still going to be song by song and tweaking things as you go?
That is an excellent question. I've seen a couple of videos recently of people talking about the recording process, like older musicians, from established musicians of the past, kind of talking about how they used to do albums in the analog days. And so I come from analog. This is actually going to be my first full length that I've ever made in a DAW. So it's a very different thing. And I think that with the flexibility of the DAW, I could do the song by song. But historically, in analog, I would do all drums first, because with a guide guitar, just do a scratch guitar track and then do all the drums, then do all the rhythm guitar, primary rhythm guitar, then do all the bass, and for it across 10, 12, 13, 14 songs. So I would just be on bass for a couple weeks, just playing bass. And I think that I'm going to try to do a little bit more of a song-by-song approach, because I kind of have a workflow now that is a lot more flexible. I'm not a slave to having to change board settings, because the problem with analog is that when you're in a setting and you're tracking, listening to playback, I had to pull cables to hear things back, and then I had to put the cables back in the jacks. I'm patch banging the whole thing.
Yes.
It was nuts. So there was really, doing a song by song process was like, it's going to take me 6 months to do 10 songs, just because of the physical effort of setting things up and breaking things down.
Yes.
So given this new workflow, I think that I'm going to do a hybrid. I'll probably do like the first 2 or 3 songs in one go, where I would get all the drums, in. And here's the thing too, is that I have drums programmed for 17 songs right now, and I'm only planning on putting 10 on the album. So I'm like in good shape as far as my breaking ground territory. I have things to pick and choose from. Whoops, didn't mean to hit the mic there. And I think that I'm gonna get a couple drum tracks imported, and then I'm gonna kind of go from there with scratch guitars. And I don't even know if I'm gonna do scratch guitars though, because now I'm like, I could just sit and just do finished tracks.
Do the final take.
Take right there.
Many times as you need to.
Yeah, and there's my time saved. So the acoustic drum idea, I think I need to just be smart. And what I might end up doing is that I may do 2 versions of the hydrogen tracks, where I import one with a fully fleshed song, and then I import one that just has kick and snare. Because I can do that easily too now.
Yes.
It gives me options. I could have, both of those stereo tracks sitting there, mute one of them, and then add all the toms and all the cymbals and all the hi-hat, and just have a really solid foundation with the kick and the snare. So I don't know. It's going to get interesting. But yeah, I think that I'm going to attempt to and I guess the point of where I started with this, and we'll wrap up with this idea. A couple of these veteran musicians, they were like, well, you really should complete a whole song, especially up front in the project, because that will inform how the rest of the project will follow. You'll have a sense of where you sit at that moment, tonally and with the vibe. And then you can kind of go, well, do I really like that vibe? Do I want the whole album to be like that? Or are we going to do a bunch of different flavors? Or are you so happy with that one track that you're just like, I just want to have that drum sound and that bass sound and that rhythm guitar sound through the whole album? So I think there is some wisdom to that idea of getting more than just like a parts and pieces view of the album, and having like that complete snapshot right up front to kind of go, oh, well, this is the way the rest of the album is flow. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's the creative if you're present and, fully connected to the creative process throughout the whole process, then you're going to have inspiration. You're going to have unexpected discoveries. You're going to have things that make you change the ideas you came in with. And so that balance of being organized and planning things out, but also planning for the variability of going through that experience, seems like the right balance to strike.
I think so. So it's going to be an adventure. I'm looking forward to it though, and the songs are all super short, and it's only going to be 10. I thought about doing like, I'll do all 20 songs, and I'll do all this, and it's like, no, be realistic. I want this done by Christmas, and I'm starting now, so it's just kind of like and I don't have all the time in the world, so we'll see.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far in the video, a subscribe would be greatly appreciated. Likes and shares are also wonderful. And as always, the comment section. Kevin and I jump in there. We've had some really robust comment sections recently that have been a lot of fun. I think that there could be a musicology book written on the Kinks video at this point by some of the people who are in there, because they're all very well informed and intelligent comments. And it's great to see that happening. That's what we're after here. So like and subscribe, hit us up in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Take care.